I looked down, and that's when that thing stepped out, and it changed my life.
Today's guest is Carlos Jimenez, an anthropologist who studied under Dr. Grover Krantz and wrote his doctoral thesis on Gigantopithecus. Mr. Jimenez was also kind enough to share some of his personal Sasquatch experiences with me on this episode. This is the Caffeinated Cryptid podcast, and I'm, of course, your host, Bobby Dizzle. I invite everyone to subscribe, and all ways to watch and listen are in the description, and of course at bobbydizzle.com. We're joined by a hero in the community, Carlos Jimenez. Boasts a crazy good resume, and I think that the universe put him here for a reason. Mr. Jimenez is founder, proprietor of the Chronicles of Carlos, an online blog at chroniclesofcarlos.com. That'll be in the description for those listening in the future because this is pre-recorded magic of TV. It's a worldwide institute for Bigfoot and hominoid news, research, and investigation. But in other news, while studying for his master's in anthropology, Carlos studied under the world-famous anthropologist and cryptozoologist Grover Krantz, Dr. Grover Krantz, which I was surprised to read. Like I did a podcast with a guy that studied paleontology under Jack Horner from Jurassic Park. So I was like, wow. But among other cryptid-related accolades, Carlos has an unpublished doctoral thesis on Gigantopithecus, founded a cryptozoology club in college, and boasts 4 Bigfoot-related encounters. Carlos, welcome to the Caffeinated Cryptid. Hope you're ready to get the thing started.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me, and thanks for that introduction.
It's just so happen like I just go through and find people with Bigfoot-related things, kind of reach out and then study their profile afterwards. I don't think that's too big of a secret that most people do that, but here lately I've been reaching out to more. I've been reaching people with PhDs and masters. I've been trying to find anthropologists, biologists, people who are actual professionals in something. And I didn't know this was you. And I saw it. So man, I've been looking for this guy and found him by accident. So I'm glad you're here. I even talked to a ex co-host of mine who is a biologist, and they suggested we get a podiatrist on to study the dermal ridges and stuff. So that's a pretty good idea.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like studying this in college?
Well, I mean, there wasn't like a specific class on it, but of course,
Bigfoot 101.
Believe it or not, that's actually what ended up getting me to be a student of Dr. Krantz's. As an undergrad, it was my sophomore year. I was pre-med at the time, and I was taking a breadth of study requirement course in anthropology. So I did an intro to physical anthropology class at Pomona College, and Dr. I'm gonna blank now. Dr. James McKenna was teaching that course, and it was a great class. It was one of the more popular classes on campus, but we got into Gigantopithecus, and he talked about Bigfoot, and I couldn't believe it. At a academic institution in the early 90s, I was shocked, and I ran up to him at the end of class and asked, "Hey, is this something that I could actually study and take seriously?" And he was like, "Absolutely." And so I switched fields from pre-med. I switched into anthropology, and he became my department chair or whatever, or head of my plan for my academic plan. And then basically undergrad, he helped me work on a project where during that project I flew up to Washington State and interviewed Dr. Krantz at the time, who had written a book called Big Footprints. And so I flew up there and recorded that. I haven't released that content. I've got those tapes somewhere where I interviewed him as an undergrad. I'm hoping to do something with them someday, but yeah. So then I got accepted for a master's PhD program at Wazoo, and ended up being his teaching assistant, and the department chair at the time. Was very much, he was a cultural anthropologist, but he was very, very supportive of me doing a thesis on at the time, again, Gigantopithecus, because that was Dr. Krantz's take, and he'd done a reconstruction. There's many new ideas out there that I think are, perhaps a little bit more valid based on the evidence that we have now.
Yeah.
But it doesn't exclude the chance of Gigantopithecus. I just think it's a little bit less likely that would be the fossil ancestor at this time.
Now, is that him that's in that famous picture? I just realized.
I'm not sure which picture.
No, wait. Well, it was, the famous Gigantopithecus picture where those scientists standing next to the model.
I know that there's one up in Idaho that he's got a skeleton of. Bill Munn, I think, was the costume designer that had a picture. Well, it had like a 3D, full scale that he was standing next to. Let me see which image you're talking. Yeah, I think that's Bill Munn.
Okay, I just hit me. I'm like, wait a minute, is it the guy?
I think. Let's see. Does it say what his name is? I don't want to misquote, but he was a costume designer, I believe.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty cool, though. I reached out to, it mentioned to Daniel Loxton on here. I've reached out to him as well. I'm trying to get people with, just, I want resumes, because I really love the encounters and habituation people I talk to.
Mm-hmm.
But have you ever been on a road trip and only brought the same thing, and like, you're just, my mouth cannot taste another Bigfoot encounter that doesn't have, like, I really love them. I love the story. That's why I start a podcast. But I want to go. I kind of push myself toward the Steven Struford area. Like, I don't want to hear any more woo anymore for a little while. I mean, I still love it, but I just want to see how the other half lives. And when I saw Gigantopithecus, I was very excited. Even though, like you said, the evidence is kind of tweaked toward the left a little bit.
Well, he definitely at the time, again, he did a reconstruction of the skull based on the jaw bones, and I was looking at teeth. I was at the Smithsonian, looking at everything that they had in the way of papers and whatnot. And I remember there was a Chinese paper that I had to have translated so I could understand, because the scientists were from China that were looking at those dragon bones, which were the Gigantopithecus teeth. But yeah, no, there was a lot of good research, and again, at the time, based on the evidence and the availability of anecdotal evidence, now, here we are, 30 some years almost later. And, there's a lot more
50 to 60 from Patty.
There's a lot more information. And of course, there's a lot possible, between the stories and between the, pictures and videos, there's some truth in there, of course, there's a lot of not great evidence as well, but I appreciate the volume of new stories, volume of anecdotal evidence that can contribute to our understandings of their behavior and what they might be up to, what they're doing. What exactly they are, though, that's still one of the questions that I'm like many others trying to figure out, because I don't got, as other people have said, I don't have one here to study. But
you don't have one. You don't have a body in your freezer.
No, but I've got a plan for if that day were ever to come. But I'm all about just to put myself in positions to potentially have encounters whenever it's possible. And currently, we filmed a documentary a couple of years ago, so I'm putting the finishing touches on that and really trying to get that done so I can get back to my social media. And I want to try to get started up on TikTok and do some a little bit more regular stuff, a little bit, even just my take, a little 5 minutes or something each week. And I just haven't had the time. I started working full time in doing a science gig while trying to finish this movie up. So you're the first guy I've talked to in a while. So I'm happy to be here and share with you whatever I can based on, probably, mostly older stories than things that have happened. Because I haven't been out recently, doing anything in a couple of years. Again, working on this film now.
Man, I kind of want to put together a documentary as well, but I'm actually a film student and just kind of lost that edge in my career along the way. But I'm glad I break your podcast fast, and I'm an up and comer. I'm coming up there. I'm pushing my way up, and I just don't know which way I want to go with it. I deal with the woo, I deal with the other stuff, and I go back and forth, and I want to give everything like an equal part. And like you said, it's kind of, the evidence is kind of changing lately, and I'm not on the fence that it looks like an ape anymore either. Like the protruding silverback gorilla look. Like nobody says that anymore.
I mean, they got the different types and whatnot, but for me, the ones that I've seen with my own eyes, that's the closest thing that I could say that they look like to something that's known. But way, way bigger, and with human-like behaviors, things that just aren't. I can't ascribe them to animal only. There's something more going on in their minds, or in their capabilities, that's beyond me, because especially my earlier years, I felt like I could get after them and track them down, and there's something about it. It's not as easy. If it was that easy, again, we would all be studying them.
Yeah, the game camera revolution would have caught them eventually if it were that easy.
Yep, exactly. I mean, there's so many game cameras, and people don't go out without a phone on them. Most people don't go out in the wilderness without some way of documenting and recording. So it's they're elusive. I mean, that's the blanket word for all of the way.
That's definitely one way to describe it.
But I appreciate your openness to all the possibilities, because I started off under Krantz very, very specifically and very one-minded and one focused, that this was some kind of an ape, and we're going to go out and shoot it, and we're going to save the rest of the species, get conservation laws and things passed once we bring a body in, and that position for me changed very rapidly as I had my additional encounters after that one I had when I was a child.
Yeah, it's really hard. Like you want to be an ape. Like when you start off, you want to be an aper. That's what someone called them. I think it's a good word. Flesh and blood, 100%. But then like the game camera revolution, the phones, and you still have the same guys saying the same stuff, and they all say the same thing 10,000 miles from each other. 70-year-old men that can't work a telephone tell you the same. Like they didn't coordinate with each other, the story, but you get the same thing. So I'm like, something's happening. Not everybody's lying. There's some charlatans out there. I mean, you're going to have that and everything. You got charlatan used car salesmen, so not necessarily specific to Bigfoot, but I think there's something to it, whether it's some kind of, I don't want to say demonic, or maybe like a weird tulpa. Something's out there doing something, as vague as I can be. Something's doing something out there.
Something's doing something. And there's people are seeing something and hearing something and smelling.
It's incredible. My friend Randy in Minnesota, he was on a documentary. Guy in Missouri, guy in Vermont, all say the same thing. And when I started doing the podcast, it was for stories. I didn't care what they were about. If it was interesting, I'll take them. And then I started noticing similarities, and I started like taking up, paradigm shift, like just by proxy. A lot to it. What was I glanced over your encounters, but I wanted to kind of hear your favorite, maybe top 2 live and in person here. I didn't want to spoil them for myself. What was the one when you were a kid that like really shocked the world for you? I noticed.
Yeah, that was the very. I mean, again, I grew up in Western Pennsylvania. For the most part, I spent a few years in Puerto Rico right after I was born, but we moved back to Western Pennsylvania and lived in a little area, a little village of Custards was what it was called. And I went to a little elementary school, one building, one classroom for each grade. But we spent a lot of time. I mean, we were country kids, and plus it was that time, latchkey kids. Even if we did live in a town, get out of the house when you're out of school. Yeah. When you're outside, doing chores or playing, don't play in the house, go outside. So we were
not till it's dark. Get out of here.
and we had floodlights. I don't know if you know what a floodlight is, but a big light on a pole that lights up a yard. I know living in bigger cities, that's sometimes something people don't know what I'm talking about. But
I'm from rural Alabama, Appalachians.
Right. So then you know what a floodlight is then.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes these things go by different names and regionally, but basically we had one of those at the corner of our yard. We lived right at the right above the water line of a swamp, big marshy area called Geneva Marsh, and I used to spend we played kickball and run around and hunt and fish and camp, but not much hunting. We were young, but we did do a lot of fishing and camping. But I was up at a buddy's house, and back then, in rural areas, other than those floodlights, there's no road lights. You're just walking, the dirt road to the rock covered road with some asphalt tar, and then to the 2-lane 55 mile an hour, state highway or whatever. So we lived on that. And then I was up at a buddy's house one night, and so many years ago now, I'm in my 50s, but I had to have been 9 or 10 is my best guess. And I know it was I know it was either the weekend or the summertime because I was dark and I was coming home from a friend's house. We were up there probably playing Atari or something. But I had one of them Star Wars guns. The movie had been out for a couple of years, and I had a little blaster toy. And I was walking home down the road up by his place. It was dirt, and there was no other neighbors. And there was a little pathway that went down to a creek down in a ravine to our right, which in my childhood seemed like a deep, deep ravine.
Yeah.
I was always saying it was like a 300-foot ravine. I don't know if it was that steep, but it was a steep down to the when we called them cricks, this little creek that ran down into the marsh. Well, that creek ran down there at my buddy's house all the way down through that ravine, and then it came out through a dairy farm across the street, across that highway from my place, went under the highway, and then went right through our front yard to our floodlight, and then carried on down into the swamp through the woods. And that night I don't remember what level of moon, but it was light enough where I could see without a flashlight in the dark. That's the best I can describe it. So I was walking, and I don't remember what happened first, if I smelled it first, heard it, or got that sense. All these years later, I feel like I must have gotten that sense, like something stopped me in my tracks. But it felt like it was almost exactly, concurrent with smelling it. And I hit that wall of stench, and I've never smelled it since. And in my other encounters, I feel like I've been closer, perhaps a couple other times I've never smelled them. But this time I smelled something I'd never smelled before. And it was powerful. I've heard many people talk about it like a wall, and that's exactly what it felt like. Felt like I walked into something and I froze, and I felt like I was being watched, and I felt exactly like it was to my right, and there was woods right there. And then again, that ravine that dropped down. And I don't remember how many seconds went by, but it got real silent. It was real silent. The smell was overwhelming, and I felt fear, or a lot of people use the word dread. As a kid, to me, it felt like I was scared, like terrified. And I grabbed the trigger on that toy gun, and it started spinning and making its noise with the C batteries. And it was kind of like a, and something to my right just started snapping trees and branches. At the time I thought, it must have been we have black bear. I thought it must have been a black bear, and I scared it, and it fell down the hill. So even though I'm scared in this moment, I'm thinking it must have been a bear. And I walk up a few steps to look down this trail, because we had a trail on the side of that ravine that we would take down to the creek, because as kids we'd go down there and then we'd walk up the creek, and there was a waterfall. And we'd go play in the waterfall and, put rocks in there and make the water rise up so we could swim and play around in there. But there was a pathway. It wasn't very far ahead of me, maybe 20 feet. So I make my way up to that pathway, and I get out of that smell, and I look back and down in there where all this crashing and breaking, again, people have said, the sound of a D4 cat running down the side of a hill. Well, I don't know what that was at that stage of my life. It sounded like, if I were to make a comparison, like a truck was just going down that hill and breaking branches. But in my kid brain, I thought it was a bear that, for whatever reason, comically was like, falling down the side of this hill. I scared it with my little toy gun. That's what so that's why I was scared, but I went up and I wanted to see, and I looked down, and that's when that thing stepped out, and it changed my life, seeing this thing, the silhouette of this huge, broad-shouldered, barrel-chested, tiny little dome-headed thing. Again, I couldn't tell you what the facial features were. I didn't see any glowing red eyes or any orbs or anything else. It was just something stepped out into that creek and stepped across the bank, and then I could hear it going up the other bank. And as soon as I heard it, as soon as I wasn't seeing it anymore, I don't think I've ever run any faster in my whole life. My brain remembers like my big toe touching the ground over and over again, just big toe, big toe, big toe. As I sprinted down, I was digging, and I was digging with my little Star Wars gun, and it wasn't going to save me. It had done whatever it was going to do, which was to scare what I thought was scare away. But I didn't know what I'd seen, and it'd be years before I really knew what it was. But I definitely had an interest in that point from that point on, and I discovered, I'm sure, shortly thereafter, the different movies and things that were out, but there wasn't a lot available. I mean, we didn't have the internet, so I was looking for library books and going, looking into the thesaurus, or not the thesaurus. What was that? Encyclopedias.
Yeah,
looking at encyclopedias and trying to see, different creatures and whatnot was out there, and finding out about Loch Ness and Bigfoot. And so that became like my thing, but I didn't talk about it. There was an aspect where there was a farmer who went back and looked, and I showed him, and we looked at the tracks together. And he said, I'll make sure that, this isn't going to be something you got to worry about, but you got to promise me that you're not going to say anything to anybody. And I promised him, and I never saw the thing again, never heard anybody else talk about seeing it. So that was the weird part, is like, what is this thing and what's it doing here? Even once once I learned about Bigfoot, probably in the next few years, I thought there was one of them out here somewhere, in California. Didn't realize that was something that, could be there or anywhere else. And obviously now in this day and age, I've heard enough of other people's encounters and descriptions, and I've had enough of my own in other states. At this point, I've now had encounters in California, Oregon, Washington State, New York, Pennsylvania, Texas, and New Mexico. So, I know that they're more ubiquitous than what I'd thought, at least then. And again, so it would be that college story I started your show off with that got me then back into it. And that's when I would have my second encounter, which was when Dr. Krantz had sent me out to go investigate an alleged encounter in the Blues Mountains. And that's when I saw again a larger one, and I had a stare off for over 20 minutes from my tent at again about 30, 40 yards away. Wow, but it was doing the sway thing. The first time it was real brief. It just stepped, paused, and then stepped again and was gone. We saw toes and heel in the creek the next morning. But this one, I was now 20 something years old, grad student, and this thing was swaying back and forth, looking at me. And the interesting aspect of that encounter was, after a while, I lost track of it. I thought it left, but then I picked it up again, and now it's down like at knee level, like it had dropped to the base of that same tree and was doing something like this. And I've heard now since this term spider position.
Spider crawl.
I've never, I didn't see the thing drop into that position. Like I said, I lost it. I didn't see it anymore. It had been swaying back and forth, fully standing. And then it was doing it at the base of the tree. And the next day I would track the tracks, because it had snowed that night. I would track its tracks a ways, and another set of tracks joined it. And the two tracks hit this thicket, and they dropped down into, again, no higher than my waist, kind of a game trail into that thicket, where they looked like they had dropped down and crawled in. And it went in and it diverged. So that was a short version of the first and second encounter. The ones
20 minutes. Say 20 minutes stare. My gosh, that's a long time.
It was like 3 a.m, and it was doing this swaying thing.
How did you see it? Was it like a light or the eyes?
Again, it was like the first. It was very similar to the first time. The only difference is the first time it was lower than me, silhouetted. This time it was even with me out in the forest, and it was silhouetted. It had been snowing, so it was pretty dark. But then the snow let up, and the sky got lighter.
Snow offers that light back up.
And I could see.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And it was a heavy snow, so it was real muffling. So it wasn't a lot of sound. So I don't know if the whole sound thing happened that time, because I've had that weird. When I've been in situations where I feel like they've been around, I've had that like I've been put in a dome effect. Like the air feels thicker, or sound is different. Something doesn't feel normal, and everything's quiet. Like it's like a muffled silence that you don't get in a normal like time in the woods, from the insects and the birds and the critters going that quiet. It's an unusual thing. If you've ever been in that situation, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, those first two times were nighttime silhouettes. But in terms of like a memorable one, the one that happened in 2020 up here in Del Norte is one that I won't ever anytime soon forget. That one, we had driven a van. I had a friend join me to move a van during COVID, and we went from Boise Idaho and drove it down here to Del Norte County. And I'd contacted my friend who has the property off grid up here above Gasky, which is where we now have campgrounds and where I've had more than one encounter. But we dropped the van off. But as we were pulling in, he had let me know ahead of time that he had some bear activity going on. So I was setting up some cameras just on the outside of this Sprinter van, or it's not a Sprinter van, it's a Sportmobile. So it's like a converted van that has a pop-up bed and whatnot in it. So I was setting some game cameras up on the back of it. And there was a strong warm wind. It was in August of that year, end of summer. And I just had that weird feeling like something was watching me. I looked back, I had an iPhone 11, I think at the time, and I hit the little flashlight on it, which gives you a little white light. I was using that to set the game cam up on the back of I was trying to hook it up to the spare tire. And I think I ended up going with the ball hitch and kind of tilting it up so that if, I wouldn't just get the knees of a bear, but hopefully, catch its face if it came over and sniffed around. So as I was setting it up, I was using my phone and I had that feeling and I turned around and there were these two, I thought they were reflectors because my buddy's driveway was pretty long and it went back and it turned to the right a little bit. And I thought, okay, maybe put those reflectors on his tree back there so that when you got to that point, you need to turn or something. But it didn't make any sense, even as I was thinking it to myself, because these were really up high and they were like eyes. They were, they weren't spaced like
7 feet high. What do you?
But they were also a little bit bigger than they were the shape of those round road reflectors that you see on the side of the road driving at night that are off a little ways to the side, but they were white. And I looked and I thought that's really weird, but I couldn't see anything else because again, this is just a little iPhone 11 flashlight, but it's giving me eye shine from clear back there. And clear back there, the next day I would measure, it was about 60 yards back from where I was standing. So I went back and finished up and I looked back again and they were still there, hadn't blinked, hadn't moved. So I'm thinking, oh, those are two reflectors. They must be stuck to a tree back there. And I go to get into the van to talk to the friend who'd helped because I drove the van and she had driven my car down so that we could leave the van here in Northern California. And at the time I was living in Southern California and she was living out in Oklahoma. So I was going to be driving her back your way, actually. Not quite as far as Alabama, but I've driven through your state a few times as well. I used to live in Houston and most of my family's still up in Pennsylvania. So it was a way to make that drive interesting, going different routes over there. Anyways, coming back to the story, as I went to get in the van, I looked back one more time with that flashlight and now those reflectors were gone. And I didn't know what that's weird. I took a step back, but my friend was already a little bit weary and nervous about being out in the boonies and sleeping in this place. So I was going in to make sure she's going to be all right. And it was warm. That wind, it was the end of August. So it was really kind of a warm wind. And so we opened up the little side window that was, and there's woods. So we coming in his driveway, it's woods. He's up there about 2,000 feet up in the mountains. And so it's mountains and woods. And within 5 minutes of seeing those reflectors, quote unquote, the loudest whoop I've ever heard in my life rips out just outside the window about 30 feet in the woods.
Oh, man.
And she kept talking. We were talking about something. And she just kept talking. I said, shh. She says, no, I don't want it to hear us. And as soon as she was saying that, a whistle responds, two-toned whistle. So there's this loud singular whoop. And then about a quarter mile up in the woods, a two-toned whistle comes back. And immediately on top of that, about a mile and a quarter or so deeper to that direction in the woods, there's that weird, but it sounded metallic, or sounded like, when we were kids, you mess around, you talk into a fan. It had that quality, but not that like, I am your father, Darth Vader kind of thing that you might do.
Yeah.
It was more like, I don't know, vibrational. It sounded like a machine was doing samurai chatter, if that makes any sense. Like a metallic little bit of, but metallic. It was weird. And then all the chickens and dogs and everything started going nuts, pretty much kind of in sync with responding to the whoop and the whistle. And so hearing that last bit was mixed with the animal sounds. So Not sure if I heard it absolutely clearly, but that's my recollection of that the third sound sounded like, again, another individual responding, but whatever its response was distinct from the whistle and the whoop. And it was something, again, never heard anything like that before in my life. So
why am I picturing a didgeridoo sound? Kind of, I don't know why.
You know, it was kind of that throat singing.
Yeah,
it was kind of like throat singing. If you could throat sing through a didgeridoo, but with like more of a metallic, like a slight metallic. That actually didgeridoo is pretty close to the tone of whatever the gibberish was. So it was weird. And again, that was the weirdest. And we stayed up there for a few nights. I got all kinds of weird stuff on that trail camera. Everything from what looked like orangutan hair arm within those 5 minutes of getting into the van. So something had come up close. I didn't hear anything walk up, didn't smell anything. But again, that whoop was close. It was as close as I was to the first. The first one was probably the close when I was a kid. That story I told you back in Pennsylvania. I couldn't have been more than 10 feet from that thing because of the distance of a little bit of woods and then the steep drop, because it dropped from that higher point. So it couldn't have been more than 10 feet, but this couldn't have been more than 20 feet away. And
I bet that was
the next day I measured where those eyes were, and there was no tree. Like I thought, well, maybe something was up in a tree. You know, my brain was trying to do the science. Like, maybe it was an owl, because those eyes were bigger than normal. Like maybe it was an owl. You know, and again, I was trying to see, like in my brain, I wanted to say it was those reflectors, but they were just a little bit too big. But the distance between them was not where our eyes would be, but a little bit more. It was just like if you started the inside of those discs where the middle of our eyes are. That's kind of what my feeling is in terms of how far apart those two round reflecting white discs were. But when I measured that the next day, because there was one branch on this bush that I could use, and I tried to take parallax into consideration from where we were standing, because it was 60 yards back, but where I was standing, it had to be all of 12 feet. I mean, and I'm glad all I saw was those two discs. That's all I'll say, because I didn't wear my brown pants that night.
And there's no way that camera, that phone light was lighting up. That was real eye shine.
Well, it was definitely when I took the phone away, because I did that specifically.
Oh, it went away?
Turned the phone away.
Okay.
It was there. When I shined it back. But again, that little light carrying that far to get such a bright reflection, you know, I don't know if it was the membrane in the back of an eye. I know that it wasn't reflectors, because there were no reflectors there the next day. And like I said, as I went to get in the van, I looked back one more time and they were gone. There was no reflection. And then within 5 minutes, there's a whoop. And again, I got all kinds of weird. That camera took like 7,000. I had it set to pictures, not video. And that game camera took about 7,000 pictures. Now, the reason it did that is because, again, I had it angled up and there was a warm breeze coming. So the pine trees were wiggling at the tips. So I was getting a great view of stars, and I could count the stars almost frame by frame. But I got some weird stuff in the sky. I got some weird stuff down right in front of the camera. I think I posted a bunch of the weird shots on my YouTube somewhere. I'm sure I did. Compiled them, because I know nobody's going to want to look at 7,000 images of the same thing.
Yeah.
But one of those frames was some weird rectangular object in the sky. Just one frame out of those 7,000, and that was weird. And it was perfect rectangle up in the sky, dark in the kind of the morning pinkish sky. Light was starting to hit the sky just right. But all kinds of weird other stuff. You know, some of it was probably shooting stars. Some of it was bugs for sure, because I've recreated that. Because at that point, then I wanted to see, well, what could make these images? What could make this, you know, show up on my camera? And so at that point, we did a bunch of tests with that game camera, using like a fishing rod, swinging things in front of it to see what it would look like at night, and throwing rocks and throwing dirt and throwing little pebbles just to see like how they would show in the, you know, if they would trigger, and if they did, like, did it show as a line? Did it show as a zigzag? What did it show as, to try to filter out? Because since then I've got thousands and thousands of images and hours and hours and hours of game camera footage.
What's the thing that the rods that got popular in the 90s? They were just bugs that flew real fast.
You know, and then that's it. Like I started looking into that stuff, because I had never heard of that stuff, but yep, I ran into rods and the little ribbons and a lot of them were just, the way that an insect reflects light as its wings move through its flight pattern. And so, so some of the ribbon things, that's what I attributed them to. But then I've got some things that look like lightning bolts. There's some really strange stuff on there that I couldn't, fully explain again, other than to make it simple. It must be some kind of bug. Like, you must have seen a bear. Well, I must have seen a bug, because I don't know. I really don't know. Again, I tried to test and recreate different things that we thought it could be. So at this point, I'm really not sure, but it captured a lot of stuff while this, like during those sounds, between seeing the eyes and the whoop, and then thereafter, that later that morning, there was more activity, but I never heard anything again that day. But for the next 3 days, we ended up getting some screams at a distance, some real loud screams that I've heard other people describe, where they just literally just screech, blood curdling screech. But the ones we heard were short. They weren't like, I wouldn't call them a howl. I wouldn't call them a growl. I would call them a scream.
It wasn't that
screech. No, it was more like, I don't know if I can, let me take a sip of my caffeinated beverage. I wasn't sure if coffee was the only thing allowed, or I've got to.
No. Sometimes I have energy drinks, but it's Lent, and I gave energy drinks up for Lent.
Okay. I'm picking up what you're laying down. I do have my coffee though, still backing me up. But no, it was like that,
just real quick,
and really loud, really a deep set of lungs behind it. You could tell that it was probably a mile and a half away, but it made everybody stop. Like we were sitting outside in chairs, watching the stars and watching, because there was a meteor event at that time. It was late August, and we were watching the meteor event, and then we heard that scream at least twice. And then that night, I actually stayed in a tent in this field and set my audio recorder up, and I got a bunch of little stones and things being thrown at the tent while I was sleeping. The only problem with me in a tent and sleeping outdoors is I have sleep apnea and I snore a lot. So
it wasn't telling you shut up. Like what?
It wasn't fun. It wasn't fun listening to that 8 hours of audio and hearing myself for the majority of it. But when I got quiet, you could hear things like hitting the tent and hitting nearby the tent. And I wasn't under a tree or anything. It was an open field. So there's times where on that property we get activity. And that was the night, like I said, that I won't ever soon forget, because I saw eyes. I now believe that I saw eyes, and that those eyes belonged to the individual that whooped. And then there were other individuals, that responded to that whoop, one with the whistle and one with, whatever that gibberish sound. But that was that one I don't talk about, haven't talked about much, and I'm not going to cover that one in the film, I don't think, because I didn't. I'm sharing it with you, and again, I'm not sharing the name of the other individual because I didn't get that other individual. The other individual hasn't gone on record with. I've asked her to write a statement, and she hasn't done it.
I understand that
some people react differently. So
I didn't realize how serious it all was.
Somebody else with me when it happened, because most of my encounters haven't been with other people. So when you ask that question, lately for me, it's anything I can corroborate. Like, I wasn't the only one that heard this. I wasn't the only one who saw this. I prefer those situations. So I don't like to.
That's a good feeling to have.
It is, because I'll tell you what. I mean, even if you've ever seen or heard one, doesn't matter. The next time you do, you might still think you're crazy. Like, why am I seeing this? Why is not somebody else?
You seeing this too? Did you hear that?
Well, and I don't know if you've spoken with anybody like this, but I've interviewed people that two of them were there together, seeing what they should have been seeing the same thing. One of them sees one thing happening. They both see this thing happening in an environment, but only one of them sees what's doing it, sees the two hairy creatures. The other one sees nothing, like kind of like, again, like they're invisible or something to the one person.
Mm-hmm.
The person right next to him is looking at the same thing and seeing these, hairy bipedal, hominoids doing the activity. So I don't know what to make of that. I don't know what to make of some people being able to see something, but I've got specific, anecdotal evidence where I've talked to people who were together and saw something in common, but didn't see, one of them saw the actors, the other one didn't see the actors. And I don't know how that's possible. If
I've
both
heard
you,
of that with ghosts, but
yeah,
never Bigfoot.
well, and there you go. It adds to that layer that I don't
Yeah.
understand. I mean, there's a lot of layer as the longer my life goes, where I started with an ape and anthropology, and there seems to be a lot of overlap with some other phenomena that I don't also equally have no clue about. You just brought some of it up, but I don't know how to explain any of those things. And I don't
Yeah.
know what the connection is other than that similarity, that there's things that are similar in some of these stories because people are witnessing things that are similar, but they're calling it different things. You know, I'm not sure that everything that I've seen or heard in the woods is Bigfoot. You know, when it comes to things that I feel like that must have been Bigfoot, if I didn't see it, how do I know? I don't know. That night there could have been 3 different beings, one that whistled and one that made the gibberish and one whose eyes I saw. You know, they don't
Could have been a fairy, a little gray.
Could have been anything. Could have been, you know, that's the problem. You know, without being able to film and see and catch and, you know, capture in a way that you could then share with people, it's really hard. I mean, I was never one to talk about, you know, make fishing stories up growing up. You know, I didn't have the biggest fish. I always caught little fish. I fished this big. But I'm telling you, that was the biggest one I ever saw. If indeed that's what it was, those eyes belong to the biggest body of any primate or primate-like being that I've ever seen.
12 feet is substantial for a African elephant, much less a
and I lived in East Africa, and I almost had an elephant step on me back in the 90s. So I can attest to that. This thing was it felt every bit as big as an elephant. Obviously, it wasn't, you know, as massive as an elephant, but it had that size that was just. And again, when you hear it, you don't have to see one to know. When you get to hear one up close or at a distance, especially if you hear one of those long, you know, drawn out, loud, deep, amplified, you know, howls or growls or whatever people want to call them, screams.
Yeah, you know, the kind they feel in the chest,
the kind that vibrate you, you know. And I watched a few of your episodes where people talk about the difference between vibrating my chest and my stomach. I don't know about all that. I know when
Daryl,
I know where I had the vibrations. I know I felt them in my body the first time I heard them vocalized, which was in New York State in 2019. That was the first time I ever heard them. Before that, all I'd gotten was those glimpses that I described earlier. But in 2019, that was with my partner Renee. She and I were together driving down through New York State on our way back to my hometown in Pennsylvania, and that I heard a gibberish, and there was one whooping again within 30, 40 yards between me and the Allegheny River. You know, there's a national forest there, but it's only like 30, 40 yards down to the river from this road that I was on. So something big was in there just whooping away at me. And then it started trying to whoop, woof, whoop, woof, 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 woof. And in the end, I asked Renee, I said, what did you hear? I said, I know you heard that. And as I'm asking her, it goes off again. So I caught it on tape. And that's on my YouTube thing. But you can hear her go, well, I don't know, because she's from here. She's from Crescent City, California. And she's half Yurok. You know, she's Yurok, Native American. And her response was, I don't know, it sounded like a barking seal. She's not a Bigfoot believer, and she supports me.
Sound like a seal.
That's you hit it. That sound you just made is exactly what I recorded. It went from whooping to woofing to that sound that you just made. And I caught that on with my recording, and she heard that. So again, like that made it feel, you know, though I knew it was real, it made it feel okay. Somebody else heard that, you know, and she's here, and I got her on tape saying it as the creature or whatever it was made that noise.
I was describing me making that noise today because I love seafood so much. So you could just throw, because somebody I know was making a grilled Key West caught snapper last week, and I was just like, give me all of it. The mimicking thing is crazy.
The hibachi house, they throw the shrimp in your mouth. You go,
oh God! But we have a fish fry at church every week during Lent, and the seafood supplier comes and makes us a special dish for the cooks because we're back in the back. And last week he made fresh snapper and this fish soup. He's a Korean fella or Vietnamese. I can't remember. I don't want to sound racist, but he's one or the other. But I mean, they just this fish big as your head. He's cooking. I'm like, oh my God, give me all. And I'm just just feed me, man. Awesome. But the mimic thing you were describing, that seems to be when that's like level 2. Like when you get too close, he starts trying to throw you off, and that's where that thing in my logo or my intro, the barred owls don't typically throw rocks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you got barred owls that would have to be the size again of gorilla owls.
Yeah, with a thumb.
we throw a rock. Again, without going too deep into other stories, but when I was with, I did a trip during COVID again. I want to say it was 2020. It might have been that same year. We went down and later in the fall. I think it was that same year, but a couple months later. I'd have to go back and look at the dates on the pictures now. But I went with a buddy of mine, non-believer, non-experiencer, but he was from Albuquerque. So we were going to take a road trip from Los Angeles over to Albuquerque, but I wanted to do the Mogollon Ridge. I wanted to hit some places, Fort Apache in northeastern Arizona, and then cross over into his state. we saw a lot of things, wood structures and whatnot, but I had my first daytime sighting with him on that trip. And then we ended up at about 9,000 feet in the Jimenez Mountains, Jemez, I believe. And it was during COVID, so everything was closed except for these this was I think it was a federal land. So we found a spot up there, and we found a wood structure. Like I thought a person or a kid had just gathered a bunch of sticks and made this like teepee structure right in the middle of the campground. So we chose that spot and we camped that night. But after the fire went out and we'd finished dinner and we were going to bed, he was in the tent about 25 feet from me with his dog, and I was in my tent, and I started hearing pacing, big, heavy steps, like 10 feet behind my head. And there ain't no way up there. And then on the other side of him, I'm hearing something walking back and forth. And then we were right at the base of this, another about 1,000-foot rise. We were at 9,000 feet, so it was freezing because it was, like I said, it was about October. And I remember his dog dish had ice in it in the morning. But that hill then went up to another ridge. I don't know how many more feet, maybe 500 more feet. At the top of that ridge, one loud wood knock. I mean, loud. And then on the side of the hill, something I'd never heard before. It sounded like, them rocks, skipping rocks, like you skip, like nice little round. It sounded like something had a rock about that size. And there were these, I don't know, 1-inch, 2-inch sapperlings, like aspens or something, alders. I don't know, the white tree bark with yellow leaves. Aspens. And something was up there. I could hear it tick, like taking a rock and like hitting those thin trees. Tick, and then another one, tick, and then another one, tick. And it wasn't like that, tick, tick, tick. It was tick, and then there would be a pause, and then one would respond. After that wood knock, I heard a little bit of that. Then it sounded like something was walking across the hill there. By the way, I'd set cameras up earlier that night in 4 directions around the camp, and I got some more weird stuff like I did that night I was describing, where I saw the eye shine and heard the whoop and the whistle and that's called the didgeridoo. I like you calling it that.
That's what I can think of.
But it just had that, like that throaty guttural, but there was metal. There was definitely a metal sound to it, and I can't place it, but that's pretty close. But yeah, no, I lost my train of thought. It's been a long day. Where was
you said you heard a rock ticking on little saplings.
And so then I started getting scared because it sounded like we were being surrounded. And that night started with these 2 big owl sounds that went back and forth. And my buddy was still awake at that time, and he's like, "Oh, that was just an owl." I said, "Man, that was a big lunged owl." He says, That's usually his response to most things. And so I woke him up. About 20 minutes of this pacing back and forth, I couldn't take it anymore. I was freaking out. I had my recorder going. I stuck it in the top of my tent to try to get the audio. And all I had with me that night was a machete. I jumped out because I've never had that happen, where it literally sounded like things were coming down the hill and now they're pacing, and it felt like we were getting surrounded. And again, there wasn't anybody else up there. So I jumped out, had the flashlight, I'm looking around. I run over to where I hear the footsteps. I'm looking up in the trees. There's just a few trees. There's not any ground cover really. It's, like I said, it's high altitude, pine. I'm looking, I don't see anything. I look on the hillside, and I've got this thing's got enough lumens where I can light that whole hillside all the way to the little tree at the top that I know something knocked against. Nothing. So I wake my buddy up. He's like, "Oh, what's going on?" And I tell him, and I end up going, back to our tents. And long story made short, I fell back asleep. Next morning, we'd been on a 5-day road trip doing this, from place to place. That was the first morning he was ever up before me and all packed up and ready to go.
He was ready to bounce.
And I was like, "Hey, what happened?" And he had found some hair. He found a good hair sample along this pine tree. But he said the rest of the night, all he heard, he said after a little while that he heard something walking back and forth, and he was hearing those clicking sounds. And when I talked to him about it the next day, he's like, "Oh, I was hearing those all night." He says, "I thought they were deer." He said he thought it was deer doing their antlers. I said, "No, deer, when they do that, it's like click, 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 click. It's a clanking. It's not a tick. It's not a tick sound."
He thought the deer were fighting?
Well, he thought that the deer were doing, whatever, he thought that the deer were doing their, making their noise. It was rut time, so he wasn't like too far out of the picture, but that wasn't deer rut. Again, I grew up in Western Pennsylvania.
It's a different sound.
It's a different sound. Deer don't go with one tine and then another one respond. Yeah, let's throw down. No, that's not how it works.
It's like British deer fencing. Tally ho.
Tally ho,
lads.
On God, chap. No. Yeah, so it was definitely that night was also a little bit that was the first time where out of all my encounters, I told you that one for me was the 12-foot thing. That was scary, but I really wasn't scared because I was at my buddy's house. I didn't feel like, but this time we were out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, you were there with them.
And we were, and it sounded like there were a group of them. There was at least 2 walking right by my tent, right by his tent. And again, I can't explain when I jumped out and then checking the cameras, not a single shot of anything on those cameras that was, something I would put out on the internet. You know what I mean? Like weird stuff, but nothing like, "Hey, look, here's something that was walking through my camp." Nothing at all.
All you got to do is circle it and they appear.
Right? Right here. There's
one fat red circle with an arrow.
Yep. Point it.
And if you could just draw the eyes, if you could draw the eyes on, find it.
Doink, doink. There's a gentleman down your way that does a lot of that.
There is. There's several. And I like every one of them, and they're all friendly, and they're all probably related to me, but I have a hard time. Like you're not helping anybody by doing that.
The weird thing is they might be seeing stuff, but when you start putting dots in pictures, then it's like, well, what can I believe?
Yeah.
I want to believe you, but you're making it hard for me to believe you because I want to see what you're seeing. I really do. When I've been out with people and talked to people that, claim that they can see these things and give them and this, that, and the other. And I'm sure there are people that can, and I'm sure some of the people that I talk to probably can, but I don't see what they're seeing. I don't understand why 2 people could be together looking at the same set of bushes, and one of them is seeing something and the other one doesn't see anything. That will continue to
that's
bother
freaky.
me. Yeah, that will continue, especially the ones where I feel like the 2 people were both credible and they both were being honest, and both of them don't know why one of them could see something and the other one couldn't. But in the end, other things happened that allowed both people, not just the one who saw something, but both of them to know that, it was no bear. It wasn't.
Yeah, it wasn't a bear.
I've
had 2 people corroborate the story that they saw a portal open and orbs come out, and they were in the same tree stand at 11 o'clock and saw it and described the same thing. And there's no reason.
Or deer.
This was in Minnesota.
Minnesota.
They go scouting a lot. I mean, this place is eat up with them. Kinsey just did a documentary on him, and I've had him on my show a bunch. I consider him a friend. He calls me if he ever has like a weird sighting and tells me about it. But they were sitting there, and he said this square door opened, looked like the Northern Lights, and orbs came out. They started crunching, turned into a squatch, grabbed some stuff out of the gifting area, went right back in. And this guy has no reason. He's not on drugs.
No, and
it's insane.
Ultimately, regardless of what how you want to call it, whatever you want, what category you want to put that story into.
Mm-hmm.
The bottom line is that story aligns with the inability to find a body. It aligns
Yep.
with tracks just ending in places where there's no regress and no other way that the individual making those tracks could have gone, whether they leapt
Yep.
up into a tree 30 yards away. There are
You're Tarzan.
trackways that just don't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then of course, again, there are many eyewitness reports where there are more now. I mean, again, they're the outliers, but I've got to take those as a scientist. I take those outliers into consideration as possibilities, though they're not the bulk of the stories. A person that sees something that looks like liquid water go behind a tree
Yeah, the
and then
cloaking.
come out the other side looking like what we all would think is a patty type creature. There's got to be something to that. Again, could be that the person's nuts, fine. But when you get multiples, even if they're, you know, out of 10,000 reports, you only get 30 of those reports. If you're getting 30, then there could be 30 crazy people, or there's something to that as a part of the phenomenon. And I jostle between the words phenomenon, and I don't like to use the word creature. I use the word being because of my experiences, my personal experiences. But I don't know enough about what I've experienced to want to categorize, and I certainly try my best to not judge others. Though what I just said there might sound judgmental. I was simply
Mm-hmm.
describing a bell curve, and those outliers, you know, are less likely, but it doesn't mean that they're not true. That's all.
Oh yeah.
That's all I'm saying. And I think that there's a lot to be learned in some of those outlier observations and behavior. And, you know, whether that's on a quantum level, a new technology, something, I don't necessarily jump to it being, you know, woo or supernatural.
Yeah.
I know as a science teacher of, you know, almost 20 years, there are things that we don't understand. There are things, the amount of science that I teach my students, I tell them that's 5% of everything there is to know.
Mm-hmm.
And that 5% that you're going to learn now and in college is only part of like 35% of what we know we don't know. Then the other
Yeah.
60, you know, or more percent is what we don't know that we don't know because we have no clue about it yet. We don't have that level of understanding of our own
Mm-hmm.
universe and its workings. And so I don't call it magic. I just call it what we don't know yet. We don't have the technology to study it yet. Yet, I'm sure you've seen these videos. I don't work for them. I'm not trying to give a tip of the hat to anybody, but a year or so ago, I was watching the show Expedition Bigfoot. Have you watched this one?
Oh yeah. Definitely seen it.
When you can have a
Not all
regular
of it. So.
camera that records light, not show something, or show a weird shadow creature going across the river that's not being cast by any of your crew, and when you can show Dr. Maria Mayer was filming with the regular camera, and then she switches to the heat camera, and what you're describing is what she caught behind that on the opposite side. She knew something was there, but the
Oh yeah.
regular
I've seen that
light,
clip.
seeing nothing. Then she flips over to the other camera, different technology, and suddenly now we've got something that fits the description, you know, that you can't see with the naked eye, but somehow you can see with a thermal.
Yeah, they can't
And
hide
then,
their heat. Like, what's
and
that
then,
about?
but then there's those weird little orb things. We're over the top of
Yep.
that one. I haven't yet seen an orb in my encounters and my experiences in the woods. I've had, you know, I've heard these beings. I've seen a couple of them. I'm sure there's been many more around that I've never seen or even knew they were there. But yeah, from the mimicking to the actual, they're vocalizing. I don't know why, you know, they're doing what they do. This is why I'm going to remain curious and keep trying to share what I know, what I've experienced, and to hear more stories and share other people's stories, much like you're doing, you know,
Mm-hmm.
through your medium. My goal is to, you know, do that just, you know, as a hobby, because I'm working, you know, full time. I'm not going to have much time to, you know, and I'm not at the beginning of my life where I can be out there running around the woods all the time either. But I'm not washed up yet either. I want to get out there and
No.
have some encounters and have some experiences. And I really don't think that you got to go as far as many people think. You know, if there's activity in an area, then be in that area, you know, and pay attention to when is it happening, you know, what's going on, because I think that they return to a lot of the areas, and I don't think it's a migration thing. You know, you like fish. Do you do any fishing?
Mm-hmm.
You ever run a trap line?
Trot line? I have.
Yeah. So you run a trout line. I think that's basically what they do. I think they have like these trout lines that they just meander through seasonally, you know, and then they get to an area that's got resources, they'll stay there for a while and then move on. And I think that the property up here, where we've had that, where I had the eyes and the whoop and the whistle, and we've had other activity. I had a daytime sighting up there. That area, I think, is an area that they run through occasionally when it's convenient for them. With the fires last year burning out a lot of the mountain woods up here, I'm surprised there haven't been more encounters. I was expecting more people to be getting in touch with me about activity that they're experiencing, but it's been just about normal in terms of the activity level, because this is the time of year where it spikes, and then again August, September. It's usually now February, March, and then usually August, September up here where I'm at.
I heard they got mouthy in the spring and fall. Yeah.
Again, if you're in the right place on his property, again, if you know the difference between a coyote and a mountain lion and a bobcat, I mean, again, and it's funny that you brought up the owls. I was out of town, but my business partner who lives up there, the friend that I said we were going to drop the van off this house, he messaged me that his neighbor called, and they'd been hearing these two owls go at it from 9 a.m. all day and all night, back and forth across the woods.
9 a.m.
Yeah. And he said, my neighbor called and said, "What's up with these owls?" I said,
rabies if that was 9 a.m.
You know damn well that those aren't owls. And he's like, "No." And then he when he was messaging me, he said, my generator's on now, but when the generator goes off, I'll try to record them. And he was, by the time the generator went off, he wasn't able to get a recording for me, but they were still going pretty much all day a day about a week ago. So again, I know that they're around up there because he's had some other things happening, but I haven't had anything. My most recent experience at all was last spring when a friend was up here. We were driving around. There's a creek that runs into the Smith River here in the Six Rivers National Forest. It's called Monkey Creek. And I was just like, you know what? With a name like Monkey Creek, I want to hike to the origins of this. I want to find and let's camp out there. So my buddy was like, okay, I'm down. So we went out and we tried to find the origins, but I have to say that it was a bit much of a hike, and the terrain was rough. But we ended up camping in the vicinity of that. Didn't have anything happen, and then we crossed over the 199 and we're heading up towards the mountains on the other side to see how far we could get up. And we pulled the car over, and he, because we don't have signal up there, he was checking some maps that he had downloaded onto his phone to make sure that we were on the right, logging roads or wherever the county roads. And the window was down just this much on my side. And we were, on a mountain road. So it was mountain steep down to the left and steep up to the right. But on the up to the right part, it wasn't rocks. It was, trees. So it was sloped. And we got a whoop, whoop, whoop. But it was like a quieter one. It wasn't real heavy and bassy. But I looked at him. And again, this is my friend who's not a believer, but he's the one that heard the footsteps all night and was up and ready to roll the next day. And that previous story. So this was just last year. And I looked at him, I said, "What'd you hear?" He says, "It sounded like whoop." But we were together for the Super Bowl week or whatever it was ago. And asked him, he's like, "I don't know what that was. I heard something." I said, "What about those footsteps?" He says, "That could have been anything." So, I appreciate him. He keeps me grounded because I know damn well what I heard. And I know he heard it too. In both cases, it's just interesting again what our cognitive dissonance, how our brains allow us to take in information, because even my brain tries to make it something that I know, make it something more, tangible. It's got to be somebody pacing back and forth. Who is that? His brain. Oh, that must be deer, clicking their antlers, but that doesn't add up.
There ain't a lot that paces bipedally that's not a person.
No, and when it's pacing, like you said, with the sound of an elephant stepping. Because I was in a canvas tent and I had elephants walking next to me as they were eating, and I could hear that it's not even just a sound; it's that feeling of it's not a gut feeling; it's just a vibration in the ground, like something that big steps. You're hearing it, and when you're laying on the ground in the tent, you're feeling it. Because I don't lay on anything but a little thin mat, so you're laying on the ground. So something big steps down, boom, boom. You're getting that little tremor,
like a T-Rex.
Yeah, I mean, if you had a glass of water, that glass of water would be making the ripples. So, but it's interesting again, and I appreciate this particular friend. He's a very good friend of mine because I know he'll go out with me again because he's not afraid. But he's going to need something more than footsteps, and I'm sure many of your audience members, just like many of the people that follow me on social media and have over the years, interacted and asked me things on podcasts and whatnot. There's a lot of people that haven't seen them. They believe or they want to believe. But there's also people that are just skeptical, and it's okay. There's a place that's necessary. You need to have those minds, because when and if you ever do, then that's going to make you more credible when you actually say, you know what, I never thought this was a thing, and then this happened.
Paradigm shift. I can't wait for it. I'm trying to get the skeptics to trust me a little, and to let me find some stuff, and then automatically hit me with a laugh emoji and report me to the admin. So I'm like, what? What did I do to you? I get hit with that a lot. I'm trying to get some of the bigger apers on, and some of the other names that you probably heard. That I don't want to say Beetlejuice 3 times, but as far as I told you, I grew up in rural Alabama. My house was in the woods, and I've heard every sound that the northern tip of the state has to offer. Even the local meth heads shooting at each other and beating the hell out of their wives. I've heard that. But
well, I'm sure you've heard some tornadoes then too, because you guys get them there.
I hear tornadoes and it's not like a train.
It's just it. And again, if you never heard a tornado before, and that's something I went through in '85. We had one go right up our street, and we were hunkered and praying, holding each other and praying. But
sounds like a jet.
You don't understand it until you feel it and hear it. When that thing moves across the land close to you, only then can you truly know what it's like to be, what a tornado's, power and force is, what it sounds like. When people say it sounds like a train or a jet, that's pretty damn close.
Sounds like a jet flying over that ain't going very fast.
Ain't going very fast at all.
I got my house got hit by one in 2018 by an F2. I know what that feels like. And but like I was saying, one of the things that intrigues me about going squatching is hearing the sound that I don't recognize. That's going to freak me out. What was that? Like bobcats. I don't think I've ever heard a mountain lion, but I think I know what it would sound like because I've heard them on TV.
Bobcats are the weirdest ones that I've heard in terms of when I moved up here. I never heard them before, but those are the ones I could see people confusing for babies, maybe.
Yeah.
At times. And again, and if you've never heard a bear bark or click, then that could be something you might confuse for something else. But again, these sounds, even if you're right on top of them, don't have that volume that shakes your body. They just
sound like something's there.
There's something about the way they're producing their sounds that's, I'm not saying it's like a tornado, but again, the uniqueness of hearing a tornado at close range is what these things are like at any range. You can tell when you hear one of these things, popping off in whatever vocal way it's doing it. That's not whatever if it's mimicking, that's not what you think it, that's not that animal. But coyotes, they howl loud. Cats, the bobcats don't get that. To me, they don't get that loud. They get high pitched.
Yeah.
Cats can get loud. The cougars, the lions, they can get pretty loud. Again, this is me speaking from my experience only. I'm not here, pontificating that I'm some expert on the, cats or anything. But my experience with the cats is, I can tell it's a damn cat. The bobcats and the cougars, the mountain lions. But the mountain lions are big, so they got a little bit more lung capacity. So when they're in heat and screaming, it'll catch your ears. It'll stop your tracks. But again,
I can imagine it's pretty.
You can tell from the volume, though. There's just it's not the same as a trumpeting elephant. It's not the same as a tiger, with that infrasound, that shaking, that vibrating, at that low frequency. And I don't know if that's all it is, but I definitely think that the people that have talked about this aren't wrong. That there's definitely an infrasound component. I'm just wondering what other components there are, because David Ellis and some other people that have studied the sound have shown on these spectrographs, these things can hit multiple octaves at the same time, which absolutely speaks to the fact that their vocal cords are different, and the possibility that they're making their sounds by kind of like a guitar, has the opening and the bass. maybe they're actually sounding inward and it's resonating back out, like on an inhale or something. So I don't know. These things,
Like
these
you
are
said
all,
earlier about the magic. My favorite thing is that the old phrase, not old, but technology advanced enough is indistinguishable from magic.
yep. I
So
mean, I was a science
there's
teacher, so I always would start with this idea that, look, before science, everything was magical.
Yeah.
If you can't explain it, magic. And of course, spiritual, religious, those things are all part, but that was all magical. You don't need to have evidence to prove magic. Everybody just knows it. Oh, well, that's the way it is. Miasmas. Oh, you're sick. Well, then you need to pray or whatever. There was
I don't
always.
I don't necessarily think that science proving something discredits any kind of higher power either.
No, absolutely not.
And-
And that was always a big part of being a teacher, trying to explain in those first days of school. Look, I'm here to teach you science, but that doesn't mean I don't have faith. And that's something I really pointed out a lot, especially when I taught in the South, in Houston, after Hurricane Katrina. That was pretty much my opening day with my students in every class every year, was making sure they understood. Look, I'm here to teach you science, and that's what I know and I'm good at, but that doesn't preclude anything about your beliefs or my beliefs. And rest assured, I'm a person of faith as well. So
I don't think it affects it in the least. I think it just answers. You get the, lack of a better term, the program about how it works. Not like it's not just like somebody said one time, if a meteor hits the earth, it would discredit the Bible. I'm like, at the end of the Bible says we get hit by fire and brimstone. That's literally the ending. Spoiler alert. That's the last page. I'm just like, it's not contradicting anything.
Could be Yellowstone. Yellowstone's big magma pool. Who knows? But yeah, to your point, words can mean a lot of things. They're not, what's literal to one is figurative to another. So, but I definitely enjoyed. I like math because math is pretty much absolute. The rules of math don't have. There's not a lot of magic for people who aren't good at math. It seems magical, but and now I don't understand the higher math, but these are things that then they try to prove. Einstein, a lot of his theories are starting to come to light because, again, the ability to test them was magical. We don't know how to test that idea, but he and many others had foresights that then allowed science to progress on those ideas that didn't have any legs to stand on at the time, other than it's just an idea.
He would have been burned at the stake 200 years ago for some of that stuff.
Heck yeah.
And the Oppenheimer thing would have been magic 100 years ago, 200 years ago.
I mean, imagine again, if we went back to the founding fathers with the technology that we've got right here, I mean, what do you think that they would think? They wouldn't think that we're Americans from 200 years later. They think that we're aliens or witches or something. I mean, I guess
you could take them a Game Boy.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the cell phone is the one thing that I always think about. Like, if you took that back to the year you and I were born and told somebody, hey, I've got something in my pocket that can do this, this, and this, nobody would believe you. And then you pulled it out, like you said, they think you're a witch, a sorcerer, or alien, or something. But that's just, I mean, the magic, the good thing about magical thinking, it opens the doors for us to, as scientists, to try to figure out, can we figure that out? Can we find an answer to that? Can we create something that can help us find an answer to that? The technology, using the science we have, can we create technology to learn the science that we don't know yet? And then that's what excites me, even, at the end of my career as an educator, now shifting over into, agricultural biologist for the county up here. It's neat to see the new technologies that are being discovered. This whole field of, quantum physics, quantum science. That's not something I ever taught. I mean, the closest I ever came to teaching that was teaching about electrons, protons, and neutrons to my students. Now there's quarks and, upspin, God particles. I've been to CERN, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I cried when I went to CERN. Like, my lady was with me. She's like, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "Nothing. This is like, thank you. This is a place I never thought I could come and see, where they are doing the science. They're doing the stuff and they don't know what it means yet. You know, they're going to be finding
they're
things,
just throwing spaghetti at the wall.
throwing
Let's
spaghetti at
change
the
Fruit
wall
Loops to Fruit Loops.
and seeing what sticks. And like, you know, that's a great analogy, you know, throwing spaghetti at the wall. They had to figure out ways to track the stuff that they were creating, because they didn't even know that some of these ghost particles were being emitted from these collisions. So to me, that's all fascinating. I mean, there's some Bigfoot people that are looking, you know, thinking through that lens.
It's possible. I mean, it's
the
possible.
Sierra Sounds and the Quantum Bigfoot book, you know, that's out there. Moorhead, you know, some people that think that way, they might not have the words or the science to really, you know, express it, but they're at least open, and that's kind of the theme of our discussion today, open to the possibility that there is a way to learn, and that might be the rabbit hole that we need to go down to learn more about this phenomenon. Maybe it is a quantum thing that we need to understand better.
I think we're going to find it in an unexpected place. And I think
it's right. I think it's going to be a shock. You know what Dr. Krantz said? He used to tell me that he believed that the first place that a Bigfoot was going to be actually captured was in a particular state. Can you guess what state he thought the first Bigfoot would be captured in?
Washington?
Nope. But you'd think that, but nope, not Washington State.
Would it be like something unsuspecting, like Pennsylvania? Because that's a big place.
That's a good guess, but I'll give you a hint.
Bigfoot state.
It's closer to you.
Oh, like Georgia or Florida?
Nah, you get Florida. He thought Florida would be the state because he said at the time in the 90s, they were draining all the swamps to make room for people to live. And he thought that was the state that would have the least amount of hiding habitat left, that eventually one or a group of them would be, you know, extirpated out of their area.
I should have thought Florida to begin with. It's totally Florida.
even back in the 90s, it was Florida man and Florida Bigfoot man. But that was what Krantz thought. Krantz thought that Florida would be the place where the discovery was going to be made.
That's a good guess. That's a good analytical guess.
But that, you made me think of that though when you said, you know, it's going to come from a place that maybe nobody's thinking about.
I mean, it's going to be them. It's going to be figuring out how to do something wild with the fourth dimension. And I didn't know I was going to talk about this tonight, so it's cool. I thought you were strictly an aper. So I didn't do enough drugs. But yeah, it's going to come to somebody trying to figure out a technology, like some Doc Brown at his house and a Bigfoot pops out.
And I honestly don't think that you're wrong. And I'm not saying that you're right, but I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm saying that is absolutely,
you know the gist of it. You get the gist of what
that is as much of a possibility as anything else. And yes, I mean, there are people with this AI. I mean, with the acceleration of AI right now in all of our hands, just like these cell phones, as people fine tune that, especially the crowdsource AI, the AI that uses other AIs. There's going to be a massive acceleration of our technological understanding, I hope, as a positive. I mean, we could talk about the negatives of AI all day, just like I can talk to you about the negatives of any kind of scientific technology, technological advances. Every technological advance in science has a potential, you know, negative application. But
I want to go on record and say I welcome our robot overlords. So if they're watching this,
if they're here now,
I'm a friend.
But again, you know, who's this? I have no idea, but I can tell you that I think that this current wave that we're in of AI technology advancement is going to open doors, and just like the garage days of the first computers, you know, where these guys that are now our billionaires were building computers. There are people out there right now that are tinkering with this AI and getting, again, the AI to work with other AI that are going to be math people. They're going to have that math mind, and they're going to think about something slightly different than any person who's ever thought before. And they're going to be able to make that application. And now that app, like you said, maybe it's going to create a fourth dimension. Maybe it'll just be, you know, theoretical, a model, but who knows that it won't be.
It's going to look like the spaceport on Men in Black with every creature known to man back there. Lizard people, and
everything starts with sci-fi, right? I mean, at least in my lifetime, stuff that I saw as a kid is, you know, if the scientists put their minds behind it and people put their money behind it, you know, they can figure it out. Yep. So, I mean, that's the positive. That's the, for me, the positive is the hope that regardless of where it comes from, I know this, I don't have a lot of faith in trail cameras and people like me going out in the woods and people going out and hitting trees and hooping and hollering. I don't know that that's going to yield any more, volume or quality of results than what we've seen in our lifetimes, going back to the earliest footage from the 60s, and again, without going even, historically before the name Bigfoot even existed.
Cave paintings.
But, cave paintings, the Native American beliefs, etc. The Vikings and whatnot, the Beowulf story, the Bible, the Genesis story and pre-Genesis story, the Book of Enoch and all that. But again, those writings aren't just fantasy, regardless of whether you're literal or if you're figurative, their story is based on something. The land of giants existed. We've seen the photos and there's evidence, the Smithsonian and other places here in the United States, the mound builders were giants, so there are things that we know we don't know. And again, for me, the interesting thing is what we don't know that we don't know and how that will come to light. I hope in our lifetimes, everything that we don't know won't come to light, but it'll just be neat to see some of that start to become part of our knowledge base. Like some of
that, a little time travel,
some of that magic, as you said, becomes part of our, something that we can manipulate, something that we can, I don't want to say manipulate, but something that we can interact with and use and understand and learn about. And therefore it's not paranormal anymore. It's not supernatural anymore. Those words used to have a lot of stigma to them. I don't think that the stigma should exist on those words like it used to, because those are opportunities. Like paranormal is an opportunity to figure out what it is that makes it para, and how do we make that normal? Supernatural is above the natural. Well, it's above the natural because we don't have the technology to.
Yeah, flying people used to be supernatural too.
Yep, exactly.
The moon used to be made of cheese.
Well,
now it's made of abrasive rocks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want I want a little time travel, just a little bit. I want to see some dinosaurs. Hey, I'll go ahead. You've been a great guest, by the way, and I don't think this is the last time to be on, but I don't want to keep you much longer because it's Friday night. I still have to act like I want to go to work tomorrow. I wanted to ask one last thing, and you can do it. Did Dr. Krantz ever lean toward the woo side once after your experience, or was he strictly just, 100% flesh and blood? Or did he accept that something might happen? You don't have to put words in his mouth.
I never told him that I had it in my sights that night.
Okay. I was going to say, if you heard about that story.
Close up of it is because I looked through the scope of a 30-06 in night at this thing. But again, all I got was a silhouette. But had I ever told him that, I don't think he would ever forgive me for not pulling the trigger. I don't think that there was an ounce of woo in Dr. Krantz. I think that he believed that this was a big ape, that it had evolved from gigantopithecus. And I don't think you would have been able to wiggle him one way or the other away from that.
I don't blame him, honestly.
Based on what he knew at that time and based on his own experiences. Again, unlike Dr. Meldrum, Dr. Meldrum and I were about the same kind of academic position at that time when I was there with Krantz, because I met him in '96 up in Harrison Hot Springs at Sasquatch Days convention, where I was doing a presentation on Gigano, and he was there talking about some Himalayan Yeti pictures. Hadn't quite gotten into his foot analysis at that time yet, heavily, but he's had an encounter, at least one, and he probably has had more than one. Dr. Krantz never had that. Dr. Krantz never himself had an experience. So that's what differentiates him from me and him from Dr. Meldrum. And I only bring up Dr. Meldrum because, again, I was getting my start around the time he was getting his start, and he's well respected, and rightfully so, for his knowledge base and for what he's put his academic.
He's got to be the biggest name out there,
and for good reason. Again, but he has been fortunate because of that to have opportunities to go out on some of these expeditions, and I think he's actually had a couple of encounters. Whether he's had a direct, eyewitness encounter and believes what he saw with his own eyes or not, I know he's, from different documentaries that I've seen, I know he's had encounters with these beings. I know that Dr. Krantz never did. Closest he came was footprints and casts and hair samples.
I'll leave you with this, and I think it's the funniest thing about Gigantopithecus in our current state of no finding bodies. We don't have bones of Gigantopithecus, and we don't have bones of Bigfoot. We got the little jaw, but that's it. Like 10 million years worth of history with this creature and no bones for it. And I'm like, what if that's answering its own question? I think it's a kind of a, what's the word? Paradox.
Paradox.
No, what's the word? It's not paradox.
Try to get that. There's one of the jawbones.
Yeah.
This one.
I mean, how much of it, the bones do we have? Is it just a jaw, or is it just like
we got 3 jaws? This is the smallest one. This is the one from India. They now call it Indopithecus, but it was definitely related to Gigantopithecus, and then again the larger species line. But the one thing that we know now, and again why I'm not stuck in the Gigantopithecus camp anymore, is that even smaller fossils, like again the robust Australopithecines, the Paranthropus, etc. Scaling of size is easy. Like all you need is resources. The more food resources, the larger things get. All you need to do is look back to the Bering, the last ice age, where we had Volkswagen size, beavers and ground sloths, and things when there were resources. And so something like a small gracile humanoid could have easily, eating the right resources, become quite large. So that's why I'm now more open again. And it's because the knowledge is increased in these areas. We know more about those evolutionary changes in scale, like diminutive versus larger. Those are easy changes. Those don't require a lot of mutation and actual genetic changes. Those just require, some very slight changes in the environment that lean towards, benefiting a smaller sized population or a larger sized individuals within a population based on what they're
like
eating.
Little Florida deer.
Yeah, the tiny Florida deer. There's a reason that they exist. When I was in the Central African rainforest eating a deek, or some tiny little forest antelope, doesn't seem like a lot, but let me tell you, it tastes a lot better than caterpillars.
Yeah, or ants.
Or ants, termites and caterpillars are their primaries. Exactly.
It has the protein.
Trust me, that's the one thing you want when you're in a rainforest. There's not a lot of that. Not a lot of protein.
Like Lewis and Clark eating them beaver tails. That's why I could do it. All right, man. This has been great. For the people watching in the future, and I halfway through this, I'm like, man, I should have done this live. This is going great. But no, this is mine. I don't want to talk to comments. Comments ruin the calls sometimes, ruin the episode sometimes. But it's chroniclesofcarlos.com. It's going to be in the description. And I'll probably air this in about 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. I have to check my schedule. I've got some other guys coming on, and hopefully I can get some authors and other scientists and things going, because now I'm kind of addicted to that thought. And I don't want to go back to people that saw one on the side of the road anymore for a little while. Just for a little while. I've got a paleontologist guy coming back. I love the paleontologist. So got that going for us. Everybody just be sure to hit that subscribe button, iTunes, Apple, BobbyDizzle.com always to listen. And you got anything coming up, Carlos, you want to talk about?
Yeah, I just want to see if I could plug real quick. We're wrapping up the movie Bigfoot Buried My Gun under the Chronicles of Carlos title. We're not sure if we're going to release it on YouTube or if it's going to be something that we try to get on a streaming service, but we're in the final phases of editing it. We shot it a couple years ago, and it's a real good film about people's encounters up here. We were going to do it as a documentary. We broke it up into a 3-part docuseries. So be on the lookout for that. Bigfoot Buried My Gun. It's one of the stories of the main character of the volume, which is Kirk Stewart. He's lived off grid for over 20 years on a property that I think is part of a trout line, where these things come pretty much every year, a couple times a year, and utilize the land, his land. He's got 111 acres up there, and the forest around him. So if you have a chance when that comes out, take a look at it and let me know what you'd like to see in the next volume.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued now. Let me know when that comes out.
Yeah, it'll be coming out soon.
Oh yeah. Thanks everyone for watching, and I'll make sure to post it when it come out so everybody can see it. Good night, everybody. Hit that theme music.
I never didn't believe in Bigfoot. I never believed in it. I didn't believe in it. I never gave it any thought.
They kept wood knocking back and forth to each other, and it was in a pattern.
Barn owls don't typically throw rocks.
I come across these tracks.
Sasquatch is still not on my mind.